Hello, hello. What's going on, everyone? This is Rounds to Red Zone, Episode 1, with your host, Ali, and
Brendan, how's it going, everyone?
today we're coming into you with our first episode. We're going to talk about our best value picks in redraft leagues, PPR format, early round, mid round, late round, and one sleeper you can kind of pick up on the waiver wire. So I think we got some good stuff for you today.
Yeah, definitely. So we don't want to bore you guys with a round by round of our favorite players. So we decided to just kind of break the rounds up. We'll start with rounds 1 through 3. We'll do 4 through 8, 8 through 12, and then 12 and beyond. And kind of let you guys know someone we're really eyeing and targeting. Do you want to go ahead and start with your early round pick, Ali?
Yeah, I think it's honestly, I think it's a good time. Labor Day weekend is obviously the biggest weekend for fantasy draft, so I think it's a good time to talk about something like this. So my first one is Drake London in the middle rounds. I think, personally speaking, he is the type of guy that you can get in the late second round. Sometimes in the early second round, but mostly I've kind of seen him go in the late second rounds. And that is so big for somebody who has wide receiver one overall tendencies. I mean, for example, the things you're kind of looking for with him is he going to get a lot of volume? And we kind of saw that earlier on with Michael Penix last year, or I guess later on in the season with Michael Penix. He was just, bombarding him with targets, and that was really, really big for his production. Even earlier on with Kirk Cousins, he was obviously getting targets, and he is obviously the type of player who is, really, really big body. He can really demand more volume. So if he kind of continues on that trajectory, he could very well end up as a wide receiver one overall. And you can kind of pair him with the running back you get earlier on in the draft, right? You know what I mean? For example, you went Saquon, or you went Jahmyr Gibbs, or even CMC earlier on in the draft. You get someone like Drake London in the second round. You don't have to really worry about, I missed out on a Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson or a CeeDee Lamb. So that's kind of my opinion about who I think we should be targeting in the earlier rounds. Obviously, there's a lot of great guys, but I kind of feel like I don't want to walk out of any draft without Drake London.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of Drake London this year. I think when you look at his season as a whole, he finished wide receiver 5 overall last year. Was healthy, which is big in fantasy. Hasn't really been someone who's dealt with a lot of injuries. When you look at those last 3 weeks with Michael Penix, you see 8 targets, 13 targets, and 18 targets. So he was already commanding like a pretty big share of targets in that offense. And obviously everyone thought with Kirk Cousins last year he would take a big step. He did, but not quite in the way everyone thought. Kirk Cousins wasn't quite as useful as people, I feel like, kind of thought last year. But the hope is with Penix, another step up in quarterback play. If he continues to have this massive target share, he should be really productive and definitely has upside and a chance to be the wide receiver one overall. And that's the kind of guy you want to get in like a second or even third round, is you want to look for guys who really could pop and explode. I'm a big fan of Drake London this year as well.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of reminds me a lot of, a few years ago, if you remember CeeDee Lamb, he kind of was going in the second round, and a lot of people, he should have gone in the first round, but a lot of people were taking him to the second round, and he ended up finishing wide receiver 1 overall, you know what I mean? And I don't know, I feel like that's the type of value that you can't really put a price on, so you want to make sure you get him as early as you possibly can in that second round, whatever pick you have. But yeah, Brendan, what do you got for us?
So my guy that I'm looking at this year in the second round is Brock Bowers, I think. So I went back and forth a lot. There's a lot of guys that I like in that late second, early third round area. And I think that my idea with Brock Bowers is you're getting that positional advantage. I think not a lot. So new coach, new offensive coordinator, and you have Ashton Genty added to the mix. So yeah, they're going to look probably to run the ball more in that offense. But as far as from a wide receiver standpoint, Jack Back and Deontay Thornton don't exactly scare me from a target share perspective. I think Brock Bowers is still going to feast. And then you have this Jacoby Myers trade rumors now. Amari Cooper, they signed him too. So don't get me wrong, they've added some pass catchers, but I don't think any of those guys really threaten Brock Bowers' role in the offense. And I think you're getting a huge positional advantage. So you're essentially getting a wide receiver one as your tight end. In any kind of tight end premium league, obviously his value goes even higher. And I think your best friend in a run-heavy offense is the play-action passing game, and Brock Bowers is a guy who can feast in that. Tight end can slip loose. They can scheme him open. I think he's a guy who could really just give you a big advantage in the tight end spot and really help boost your team.
I completely agree with that. Honestly, it's one of those things where I've heard a lot of this past offseason, Geno is not really a big tight end guy. In Seattle, he wasn't necessarily, peppering the tight end with a lot of things. But the thing is, in Seattle, did Geno really have a tight end like Brock Bowers? He had wide receivers like DK Metcalf, JSN, Tyler Lockett. But, it's not like he has those guys over here in Las Vegas Raiders. You know what I mean? He has Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers could be that guy he's just constantly peppering with targets like the Raiders did a few years ago. Or, I guess, last year. My bad.
Yeah. And, that's the biggest part I actually forgotten all that is the quarterback upgrade, right? Geno Smith is definitely a significant upgrade over Aiden O'Connell or who was there? Jimmy Garoppolo early in the season, I think, right? But
something like
was that 2 years ago?
Gardner Minshew maybe at some point too, right?
Yeah, so all kinds of, he had a mixed mash of quarterbacks last year. Primarily, it seemed like Aiden O'Connell most of the year was the guy. So I think when you look at his better quarterback situation, they might run the ball more, but I think he's still going to have a huge target share and load of that offense. So.
And it's funny, I just kind of looked this up, but he had only 5 touchdowns last year. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I feel like there's a lot of guys who maybe have, 8 a lot because of, a lot of touchdowns, and, maybe there's some regression due with them. And it seems like he only had 5 touchdowns. So it's like, he's due for a little positive regression with a step forward with the offense, right? Geno gets them a little down to the end zone, looking for his guy Brock Bowers in the end zone, and that could be very big for him.
Yeah, I agree. All right, do you want to hit us with your middle round guy you're looking at, Ollie?
Yeah, so in the middle rounds, I think there's a lot of value in the middle rounds. And this year specifically, the way the draft is, it kind of seems like it's very top-heavy on running back. The first few rounds seem to be where a lot of the running backs are very, very good. But I would say that even then, I think there's some value in the what they call it, the RB dead zone, right? The rounds like 3 to 8 or whatever. It's the RB dead zone. Like, I think there's a guy there, Tony Pollard. Honestly speaking, last year the offense was terrible. You know what I mean? It was not good. There was not much going on. They're clearly gonna have hopefully an upgrade with Cam Ward this year. It's Cam Ward. Is he better than Will Levis? Probably. It's like, and on
they
top
hope in Tennessee.
Yeah, I sure hope so too. I'm not even a Tennessee guy, but I feel like he has to be an upgrade over whatever they had last year. So, and the thing is, and that matters a lot for a guy like Pollard, right? You know what I mean? You can use him in the pass catching game. You can use him, as a runner, and that's going to matter a lot. And especially if they end up taking a step forward as an offense, he can also have a little touchdown as well. You know what I mean? A little positive touchdown regression, which could be very good for him. And, it's like I was one of those guys who was never really a Tajay Spears truther. But, if you don't know, he's injured again. You know what I mean? So it's not like he's going to be taking away any type of work from Tony Pollard, especially in the first few weeks. But, I don't know if it's going to be, going any differently even when he does come back. So I think Tony Pollard's a guy you can get pretty cheap. I think his ADP on ESPN, last I checked, it was in the 70s. Yeah, it was 70 pretty much on the dot. So you can probably get him in the 8th round. And I feel like, with a draft that's kind of top heavy on running back, if you do miss out on one of those, elite running backs or something, and, you're really kind of craving for somebody, Tony Pollard is a guy who will finish probably, within the top 15, but maybe has upside to finish in the top 10, maybe like an RB8 or an RB7, and that has value. Not every single guy is going to finish RB1, and that's fine,
Yeah, I agree. I like Pollard. I think, like we had talked about before, too, a guy like Calvin Ridley as well. Like all these Tennessee weapons, you're hoping with the addition of Cam Ward, kind of the further development of some of those young guys on the offensive line, that you're going to see a better offense in Tennessee. I mean, Will Levis was, he's got some upside, talented. Like he looks like he could be talented. Maybe some good traits, I guess, of a could be talented quarterback, but. When you watch his film, he just makes a lot of like mental errors and turnovers that really blew up their offense and cost them games. So the two of those guys, both I think we had talked about, like can be very quality additions to your team in the later rounds if this offense takes a step forward with Cam Ward. Tyjae Spears, I agree. I feel like he's one of those guys that always lives off hype and not actual production. I don't know how that split will happen. And when you look at last year, Tony Pollard's season, he had like a quietly pretty decent season for RB2, RB3. He was averaging close to the mid-teens, low 10s in points up until when he started to get injured later in the season. So that's a guy definitely, if he comes back and there's a little more receiving upside and a more pass-heavy offense, who could definitely really be a good addition to your team in the middle rounds. For me, my next guy, I think he's kind of closer to the earlier, I would say round 4, round 5 region. In some leagues, people are probably getting excited and taking him in round 3 even. It's Travion Henderson. I think he's a guy, right? Again, we're talking about this running back dead zone. So you miss out on those first 9, 10, 11, 12 guys in those early rounds. And those are the guys who you're feeling pretty confident is going to be your RB1. They're going to really anchor your team. And I feel like this year there's a lot of depth at wide receiver. You can find a lot of guys later in the draft who are in good situations, could see a high target share, could see a lot of volume. Running backs, I feel like there's a stiff fall off. If you don't get one of those first 15 to 20 guys, you could be looking at getting someone in a committee. You're kind of just taking a shot at and hoping for the best. So the reason I like Travion Henderson is I feel like rookies can win you redraft leagues. So when you look at the last few years, right, you look at guys like Bucky Irving was a late round rookie. Obviously, Travion, you're going a little higher. He's got a higher draft premium. But you look at guys like Neighbors, Jaden Daniels, Brock Bowers. The year before that, you look at a guy like Puka was a sleeper as well. But these rookies you get, if they really pop, they end up being way more valuable than their ADP. And I think there's a lot of reasons with Travion Henderson to believe he could be really explosive really early on. So I think Ramondre, right, he's going to factor in early for sure. But you're looking for guys who are going to help anchor your playoff run and really give you a shot to win the whole thing. And so when you look at a guy like Travion, when you roll back his Ohio State tape, he's got explosion all over it. He reminds me a lot of a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. They're both a little bit shorter, they're twitchy, and they're fast and explosive. And when they hit the gap, they're gone. And when you look at his tape from the Ohio State championship run, you see a guy like that. You see him ripping off 50-yard touchdowns. You see a clutch factor to it. When they needed him in that Texas game, he took one to the house. So I feel like he's a guy that will definitely quickly start taking over that backfield. Ramondre's got fumbling issues. He's a bigger back, so you could see Ramondre in the short yardage situations for sure. But I think Travion Henderson in an offense without a ton of real pass catching threats either, he could factor in big in that way. And you could see him similar, like I compare him to Jahmyr Gibbs because you could see a similar role. You could see Ramondre kind of playing that Montgomery role, and you could see Travion Henderson being the Jahmyr Gibbs in that offense where he's the pass catching back. You see him getting a lot of outside zones, a lot of stretch runs where he can hit the gap and really hopefully get downfield. So yeah, I think that's pretty much why he would be the guy for me around that time for a second running back.
I think that's honestly great analysis. I think the thing that people might get frustrated about is he might start off just a little bit slower than people would like, specifically because, like you said, Ramondre is going to be kind of taking that early role, kind of when that offense first gets going in the first few weeks. And that's fine, that's kind of how he usually rolls with rookies, where they do kind of have that slower start, but they do end up being those league winners at the end of the day. They're the ones that kind of, a lot of times they'll pick up in the second half of the season. A lot of times even after the bye week, right? For example, after the bye week, maybe their offensive coordinator is Josh McDaniels now, right? And, maybe he'll kind of like reevaluate. He'll be like, okay, like maybe we can kind of get Travion more involved. Or, I could just be entirely wrong. We could both be entirely wrong. And, Travion Henderson is the RB1 from day one. He's getting all the work and Ramondre's just kind of getting a little bit of the work. So, we'll definitely kind of see how that progresses. But I totally agree. I mean, Travion reminds me a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs as well. And, I do wonder, if like Quinshawn maybe was not on that team, like on Ohio State, do you think Travion could have been like a first-round pick instead of being a second-round pick, just because if he got all the work instead of it being a split committee? I could see him potentially going, as high as Omarion Hampton did. So, I don't know. I mean, that's just something I think about sometimes.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's a curious question to ask because even if you look at the fact that Travion decided to come back for his senior year and coming out of his junior year, he was right there, kind of just behind Gibbs and Bijan, I believe, or I might be off by a year. At the time, behind Gibbs and Bijan. They just finished their second year. So he, at the time, was like right there behind those guys, basically. He probably would have been the third running back off the board that year. And then he decided to come back, and obviously Judkins transfers to Ohio State, and they're splitting, and Judkins sees a lot of the early down roles, with Travion seeing a lot of the third down and early downs as well. You wonder if Travion had the full workload and he puts up 1,500 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns and 300 or 400 receiving yards if he ends up being in the first round running back. And that's definitely a possibility, I think. And I think another good point you made with Josh McDaniels coming back is you look at how Josh McDaniels, some of those offenses in the past have used running backs in the past game. You think James White, right? Like, think about the difference in talent between Travion Henderson and James White. Not to say James White isn't a talented player. Obviously, he made a lot of big plays for them. He won them the Super Bowl. But the explosion difference between him and Travion Henderson is huge. I think you see it even in that first preseason game. Travion Henderson's first touch from scrimmage, or not even from scrimmage, on the kickoff, he takes to the house. And you just see that speed, and it wows you. So he's a guy I think really could help a lot. But again, there's a lot of hype building around him, so you don't want to reach on a guy like that either and take him in the second round. If it's late third round, maybe he's a guy you think about, but I really would try to hold off till the fourth round, or even if he falls, he's definitely a guy I would want to scoop up.
Totally agree, man. Let's, I guess, move on to the late rounds now. So, a guy that I am targeting in all the late rounds, and, this is a guy I really do not want to leave the draft without, to be honest, is Travis Etienne. And it's funny because Brendan and I do play in a Dynasty League together, and Brendan has Etienne, and I've been giving him, a lot of, just a little bit of trash talking. Yeah. And I've been trying to buy Etienne off of him, so I've been trying to, see if he would be able to sell him to me for cheap. But I mean, his ADP is on ESPN, it's 117. It's like you can get him pretty late in the draft, in the 12th round, and I get it. He had a pretty bad season last year. Like, it was definitely not good at all. I think he got injured at one point, which definitely did not help him. And Tank Bigsby started to kind of eat into that kind of role that he was having, and then he started to kind of, I think he started to develop some problems. Just kind of picking up yards. He was getting a lot of negative plays. But I mean, again, this is a guy who is coming off of, in 2023, he had an RB3 season at the end of the day. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, we can't really ignore that. And that's when the offense was good. And that's when Trevor Lawrence was good. He was not injured until late in the season when he got injured. But he was doing well at that time. The year before that, I mean, he finished as the PPR RB17, but he had 1,125 yards. He had 5 touchdowns. He had 316 receiving yards. This is a player who I feel like should not be going that late in the draft. I feel like this is almost, the thing is, I know a lot of people are pretty big on Bishal too, and people are pretty big on Tank Bigsby, but at the end of the day, those are both backs that do not have, really that first round or second round or that early round capital, which is pretty big for running backs. A lot of times running backs don't last when they don't have that first or second day capital in the draft. But on top of that, I mean, worst comes to worst, I think if Etienne is not necessarily the guy that Liam Cohen is relying on, which I don't think will happen because I feel like he's the type of guy that Liam Cohen will like a lot in his offense. But if he's not, I could see them trading him to like a contender. For example, he could get traded to Washington. Washington might want a running back. They might realize that, this whole hype on Bill is just hype. He's not really that guy. Maybe they do want Etienne to be the running back, or maybe somebody else comes and trades for him. Either way, I feel like you're not this is a very low risk pick at the 12th round because there's not many guys who could even give you that upside to be, the RB1 or the RB2 or the RB3 for that matter, and ETN could be, somebody who finishes in the top 10 and you got him in the 12th round. Especially, again, we talked about this, in a draft like this where it seems like all the running backs, especially all the starting running backs on high-powered offenses, are all going in the first few rounds. So it's very valuable to have a guy like ETN. And I don't know, I feel like this is kind of like a trajectory that kind of a lot of top running backs follows. They all play on usually a very high-powered offense. We all expect, Trevor Lawrence, Liam Cohen, them to take a step forward as an offense. I mean, last year was just a bad year for them, but we all expect them to take a step forward as an offense, and that means usually a step forward for the running back in that role. And he could get a lot of receiving work too. He is the receiving back in that offense for sure. So, I don't know. I just don't understand why he is going that late. I don't understand why people are so out on him, but I'm not leaving the draft without him personally in a redraft league.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is concern. Obviously, there's concern with Tank Bigsby being there. They drafted Bashal Tutin, but I think that concern is tampered and kind of factored into your 12th round grade, right? If those guys weren't around, he's a guy that might be going in the 5th or 6th round. And last year he was a guy that was going in like the 2nd or 3rd round. So I like a guy like that who had a lot of hype the year before. He has one established season of being elite, and you're looking at him in round 12 and you're like, well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, right? I mean, you took him in the 12th round, you'll just pick him up and pick up a guy off waivers and drop him. So I think, yeah, he's a guy, right, when you look at that Liam Cohen offense, like you kind of mentioned, like you saw Bucky Irving last year kind of thrive in that role. And I think Travis Etienne's the Bucky Irving of this offense, right? I think Tank Bigsby's a little closer to Rachaad White. He's bigger, more of a bruiser. And Etienne's kind of that slasher, that cutter. And you can't forget, Etienne was elite in college. He's an elite talent at the end of the day. He was a first-round pick. He's got all kinds of measurables that point to him being really successful in the NFL, and he's had that success. So he's a guy I think that's worth kind of tapping back into that well and hoping he can return even partially to his form of his 2023 season. And if he does, then you might have a guy who finishes in the top 15, top 10, top 20 running backs who you got in the 12th round. So I think he's definitely worth a look for sure in that offense. So for me, the next guy I want to talk about is, again, I'm kind of tapping back into this rookie pipeline. And that's, again, like I said, I love rookies, especially late in your kind of redraft league. They're guys who can win you. Last year, I got Brian Thomas in like the 12th round, and he ended up being my best receiver on my team. So the guy I like this year a lot is Jaden Higgins. And I know he's probably not going to be the wide receiver one, possibly throughout the whole year, or even definitely not right away with Nico Collins there. But you're looking at an offense that is going to pass the ball a ton. They've basically come out and say at this point that they want to throw the football. They've got C.J. Stroud, Mixon's hurt, Nick Chubb, we'll see. I'm not totally saying he's going to be totally ineffective, but definitely his yards per carry was concerning with Cleveland last year. So you look at a guy like Jaden Higgins, right? 6'4", runs a 4.4 40. He's a pretty smooth route runner. And he's also a guy, right, that you see they used elite draft capital on. He was their first pick in the draft. They drafted Jalen Noel as well. Clearly, they realized wide receivers a position of need. They trade for Christian Kirk. So I'm not saying there's not other guys in this offense who could see some targets. You got Dalton Schultz as well. But I think when you look at Nico Collins and then the guy after that, I think, is Jaden Higgins. I think that he is, in a pass-heavy offense, going to see some targets. He's going to see a decent target share. And I think for me, the silver lining is Nico Collins tends to be an injury-prone player. He's a guy who missed like 3-4 games last year with a hamstring. The year before, he had a pretty healthy year, only missed a couple games. But the year before that, he missed 3, 4, 5 games. The year before that, he missed 3, 4 games. So in his 4-year career, he's averaging probably 3 to 4 missed games a year. And so you look at that, right, and you say, what if that 3 to 4 weeks comes week 2 or 3, and then Jaden Higgins takes off, right? Like, he's a guy who all of a sudden he's getting 25, 30% target share, and he's ripping off 100-yard games and long touchdowns. All of a sudden, that's a guy, right, who he's going to be super involved in the offense the rest of the year. And I think when you're taking a stab in a late-round pick, you're looking at him in rounds 11, 12, 13. He's a good guy with a lot of upside. He's got the measurables athletically, and in a pass-heavy offense with a pretty decent quarterback, he could pop. And that's what you're looking for at this point, guys who could pop. And with rookies, there's a lot of unknown. That's part of the reason they go later in the redrafts. It can be reasons they go higher. So you have to be careful with rookies. You can overdraft them, and then they end up never living up to that kind of hype. But I think Jaden Higgins is a guy who's got a safe floor. I think worst case scenario, you're looking at a guy who could get like 6-7 points a week. And I think best case scenario, he ends up being a guy who could get you 13 to 15 a week. So, and he could be a week-to-week thing, depending on the matchup, depending on who's hurt. All kinds of stuff like that comes into play here.
I guess my question to you kind of is, I kind of want to make this a little interesting. What do you kind of think Christian Kirk does in this offense? Do you think he starts off as the wide receiver too, or do you think, Jaden Higgins is immediately, the wide receiver too in that offense? How do you think he kind of he's not somebody who I guess is going to disappear, right? They did trade for him at the end of the day. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think Christian Kirk, right, he's there, but I think my thing with Christian Kirk is I think he's going to be the guy who runs out of the slot. And I think Jaden Higgins you're probably going to see on the outside with Nico Collins. And maybe they move Higgins inside, but Nico Collins is clearly their X guy. He's the guy who's going to play a lot outside. Maybe they'll move him inside for matchup things, stuff like that. But I think Christian Kirk seems to factor as more as the slot. I am not a super big Christian Kirk believer. Back in the day when he first went to Jacksonville, he had a really good season. He, in the past, has had some pretty good route separation numbers, advanced statistics. But I don't know. He's a guy who was banged up all last year. And then after that first year in Jacksonville, he wasn't really much of a huge factor in that offense. He's another guy, too, who's just hurt all the time, it seems. It seems like he misses decent chunks the last couple of years for injury. And he's not a guy, I think they traded for him more out of value getting him. But then after they trade for him, they draft Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. So you're like, how much do they believe in Christian Kirk, too? I don't know. So we'll see. I think the odd guy out is Jalen Noel from a rookie standpoint. Normally with a third-round receiver like that, he's a guy maybe you'd be looking in late rounds to capitalize on, or even in these dynasty formats. He's a guy in the late rounds of the dynasty draft you'd really be eyeing in an offense like this. But with Christian Kirk, I think he kind of slows down the I guess, the production of a guy like Jalen Noel quicker. I think you'll see Jaden Higgins out there quick. There's a chance that Jaden Higgins, he starts the year as wide receiver 3. But again, Nico, Kirk, you could see those guys go down and Jaden Higgins quickly become a number 1 in that offense. So we'll see. And like any guy at this point in the draft, you're factoring in some risk. But he's a guy I think could pop. And Christian Kirk doesn't scare me too much off him.
That's fair. That's a fair assumption. That's a fair take to have. Honestly, I personally do like Jaden Higgins a lot in that range as well. But I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that because I know there's a lot of Christian Kirk truthers, so it's always something to think about. Kind of the sleeper pick that I think you could probably get him off the waivers if you've already drafted. If you've not drafted, you could probably get him in the last round of your redraft leagues. I know I picked him up off the waivers in our Dynasty League, and it's a guy, his name is Woody Marks. He is going to be, we just talked about the Texans, right? The Texans have a very, very big problem at running back this year. Joe Mixon doesn't seem like he might even play a snap this year from the way, his injury's progressing. I think he's starting the year on IR if I'm not wrong. And they got what? They got Nick Chubb, who is going to be playing pretty much as the guy for them. And the thing is, I loved Nick Chubb, and I still like him a lot, obviously as a person, and because he was so good for me, in the years when he was healthy on Cleveland, he was a great player to have. But he's not that player anymore. You know what I mean? That injury that he suffered back in 2023. It was probably, it's shocking that he is back, and it's very awesome that he is back because he is such a good player. It's
dedicated,
awesome that he
hard worker.
Yeah, it's great that he is back, but the question kind of becomes: is he going to be able to last the whole season? Is he going to be effective at all for them the entire season? Is there at some point do they think that Woody Marks may be the better player, for them to kind of rush the ball with? So I think that's something. And the thing is, again, you can get him for cheap, right? I'm not telling you to draft him over, like Travion Henderson or something. This is a guy you can get, in the last round of your draft or potentially on the waivers, and you can just kind of keep him and see what happens. if they do decide that Nick Chubb is not that guy for them, maybe they'll start to work in Woody Marks a little bit more, and maybe he can start to take over that backfield eventually. And who knows? You might get a 1,000-yard rusher out of him. He might be that guy for you who's a sleeper. Who fills in on those bye weeks for your players. And so I think it's worth stashing him, seeing what happens. So. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think a 1,000-yard rusher might be a little optimistic about what he marks. Unless by week, maybe if by week 5 or 6 he's the full-time guy and seeing 100 yards a week. But I think you're dead on with the analysis of that backfield. It looks like Joe Mixon, this injury is more concerning by the day, it sounds like. And then Nick Chubb, there's serious question marks if he's ever going to be the same player. This is the second catastrophic knee injury he's experienced. Obviously, before he was able to come back and be efficient, but you just don't know with a guy like that. He's older now. He's if he hasn't hit that 30 mark, he's definitely approaching it. And so I don't know. It's not a guy that if you're the Texans franchise, you necessarily, if he's struggling, want to keep pouring resources in when you have a rookie like Woody Marks. If he's showing stuff in camp, if he's showing stuff in the touches he gets, he's a guy they might just say, all right, well, let's roll with him. And then, and like an offense that figures to score a decent amount of points and move the ball, he's a guy who has touchdown upside, and that's big in fantasy for sure.
And I just want to point out, at his last season, I think it was at USC, he did have, 1,000 yards on 198 attempts, 1,100 yards. So, who knows? He might be that guy for that. But I don't know about 1,000 yards. But it might happen. So we'll kind of see.
Yeah, definitely. So it'll be interesting to see with him. But all right, my last kind of sleeper guy here. So I think it depends what you need, right, at this point in the draft. I think these last couple rounds are good spots for quarterbacks to bleed through. If there's a Dak Prescott or Justin Herbert sitting there and you either haven't taken a quarterback or need a decent second quarterback, those are good guys to go after. I think Justin Fields is another guy. If he falls that far and you're seeing him rounds 12, 13, 14, he's a good guy to strike on just because you're looking at a guy, right? Yeah, in dynasty formats, I'm not super high on trading for a Justin Fields. I think if you have him on your team, he's okay to hold. But you just don't know job security from a dynasty standpoint. But from a one-year kind of outlook on this Jets offense, there's nobody else there competing with him from the job. It's his job. He's going to play the whole 17 barring injury or some sort of catastrophic, terrible play. And so you look at a guy like that, Fields, who's got this significant rushing upside, and he's kind of reunited with Garrett Wilson, his college favorite target. And you're like, this is probably a decently optimal situation for him to succeed. If he can kind of continue that rushing upside he's seen in past years, he could be a top 10 quarterback. He's a guy definitely who bleeds through at this point that it's worth stashing him as your second quarterback. And who knows, by week 3 or 4, he might be the guy you're starting every week. Otherwise, guys, at this standpoint that I like from a running back's perspective, you talked about Woody Marks. I agree. I like him at this point. I think Ollie Gordon is another guy who's trending up and kind of becoming a popular pick that people like, mostly because of what you see with this injury situation in Miami. You look at Devon Achane, he's got this calf issue going on, and if you're Miami, you definitely want to take caution with that. We just saw in the NBA season how these calf issues can lead to these Achilles tears, and you definitely, if you're Miami, don't want to see a guy like Achane go out for the year and get a significant injury like that. So with Wilson as well, he seems to be hurt. He's going to miss multiple weeks. Ollie Gordon could see week 1 be the starter, and maybe he's a guy early on who plays real well a couple weeks, and then you ship him off for someone who you know is going to be more established later in the year. It's just something to keep in mind with picks at this point. These are guys who could very well end up on the waivers by week 3 if you draft them here, but they're guys you could stash, and maybe they end up being useful for you. And then the other running back I kind of eye at this point is Jaden Blue. Jaden Blue's a guy, could end up quickly becoming the one in Dallas. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty. I don't need to get into that whole situation, but he's definitely got the most pop and explosiveness of that group, and he's a guy you could see kind of maybe coming out of that group. And And so, yeah, I think I gave a little quick group of guys there. There isn't one guy at this point I particularly love. Guys like Luther Bergen, Colson Loveland, if you just want to get a piece of Chicago's offense and hope one of those guys pop. But it's definitely a crowded field. Yeah, I think though that's a group of guys I'd be looking for at that point in those kind of late rounds. Yeah. So, is there anything else you want to add, Ollie? I think we got through the guys that we both like, and it'll be a good kind of starter. I guess, do you have any? We could throw in a few general tips for a redraft league, and then we'll call it an episode.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my biggest tip is always to get your guy. It's it's always one of those things where sometimes I try to say, maybe I'll get him in the next round. And sometimes you just don't get him in the next round because somebody else thought they was their guy. So always get your guy. If you believe in them, go get him.
Yeah, I agree. You definitely want to get your guys in redraft. You don't want to let guys that kind of feeling of watchful waiting and then watching them get scooped up the pick before. It's just too painful to really experience. And then the one tip I have is volume is king. You want to take guys who you're going to project to have volume. You don't want to draft guys just to draft them. Don't just draft them based on the name. If there's no evidence that they're going to get volume, it definitely significantly hampers their fantasy production. You want to get guys who are going to possibly see a lot of snaps, possibly see a lot of targets, and see usage. And that's basically, I would say, my biggest tip in redraft leagues. Far too many times I see guys just taking people based on their ranking, based on their name, and they're not really looking at the situation. And the situation's what matters. You could take a guy who's never really been successful, and if he's looking at a situation where he's going to see a lot of usage, he's a guy worth snagging in the late rounds. So yeah, I think that would be my biggest tip is volume. So yeah, thanks for listening to our first episode. We'll close it out here. And yeah.
Yeah, follow us on X at Rounds to Red Zone, on TikTok at Rounds to Red Zone. We'll look forward to seeing you guys again on our next episode.